If you're into anime and semi-realism art, then you've probably come across Kuroshiro on Instagram or YouTube with all his tutorials in speed paint. And of course, his art style looks super pretty with beautiful rendering, so of course I wanted to study from him. So I'll go over what I was able to learn and summarize from what I think the most important tips from his tutorials are, but of course I recommend watching his tutorials as well after this video. I'll be studying primarily from these pieces of his I got off of his YouTube and Instagram. Alright, whenever you start an art style study, you should always know what it is that you like the most and would like to replicate in your own style. Maybe it's the rendering style, the proportions, the way they draw eyes, or something else. So in my case, I focus primarily on the face, hair, and rendering on top of the overall style. Okay, first let's go over the proportions. They definitely have a strong grasp of anatomy, and despite their style being a mix of anime and semi-realism, when it comes to the majority of the proportions, they definitely seem to lean more towards realistic. The only parts that don't follow a more realistic proportion seems to be the eyes and a little bit of the neck. While I wouldn't call their eyes big when compared to something like TBHK, they also aren't on the small end like I would consider Tricky Wagons are. I think their eyes, interestingly, falls a bit more in the middle, and I think this might be part of why their eyes, in my opinion, still stick out and look unique, even though their rendering and style of the pupils are what I'd consider more on the simpler end. The eyebrows also seem to be usually on the thin end, and besides that, the neck isn't thin like you'd see in a lot of animes, but it's not wide like more realistic necks are. I think it's more closer on the realistic end on the wider side, but it's shrunk a little bit smaller. So it's a bit thinner, not quite as thick as realistic neck is, but definitely thicker than a thin neck. For the proportions of the face, the eyes are generally one eye apart with some distance between the edge of the face and the eyes. If you combine the eyes and the eyebrows, you can divide the face into roughly 5.5 parts, with the chin being a bit pointy end like you see in anime, so the chin is probably like about 0.5 of the space taken up by the eyes and eyebrows. The nose is actually drawn out and not just nubs, unless it's the front-facing view, in which case they seem to use a more typical anime nub or like straight line to represent the nose. Interestingly, they do often include lips, or at least bottom lips, even on male characters, which I think is interesting since I often only see lips rendered on female characters. And lastly, they do include the nails on the fingers, including males as well, opting for more typical round hands compared to the more blocky hands Tricky Wagon uses. The brushes Kuroshiro uses is available for free off of Clip Studio's asset store and comes with two brushes at the moment. One that he says he'll use for sketching, line art, and rendering, and another he uses just for line art and rendering, at least according to the listing. In my experience, the sketch brush worked well for the sketching and rendering while leaving the ink brush for just the liner. He has changed the brushes he uses over the years, but at least as of his latest video, these are the brushes he seems to be using the most. Besides the G Pen, which is just a brush that's free and the default brush in Clip Studio Paint, that basically mimics the traditional pen a manga artists use. It's kind of like a hard round brush, but it has like a unique taper to it, I think is probably the best way to explain it. But anyways, his sketch and ink brush are a rectangle shape with some texture to it, but the sketch brush also has like these blots that appear when using them. I'm honestly not really sure how to describe it. That's kind of the best thing I can think of. The sketch brush also blends, which I don't think the ink brush does. His ink brush is set to literally always be black, no matter the color selected, so maybe it blends, although from what I could tell when using it, I don't believe it blends at all. Also, the line art is black and generally seems to stay black. Now, when it comes to the sketching process, this is where I thought it was rather interesting. For starters, they draw the entire body even if it gets covered up in clothes later, and they say they do this to make sure the clothes appear more natural, and honestly, yeah, I definitely see how this helps in making sure the cloth falls naturally even if it adds a bit of time. Although you could argue the time added to draw the anatomy is probably offset by the time you would have had to use later to adjust the clothes later on, but either way, I think this was actually pretty interesting as I've never seen another artist do this, and I think I'll probably try to carry this over in my own work since it does seem pretty useful. The second thing that I thought was rather interesting is that when they're drawing the base sketch, if they decide to shrink the drawing to include more of it or like increase the canvas size or something and further adjust the pose, they then will change the color of the sketch brush, and it's kind of used, they also like mark where, like what size the canvas originally was with like a little line, like a little dash. And I thought this was pretty interesting because again, I've never seen an artist do something like this before, but I do think, you know, it probably helps them. I imagine that they do this to help them kind of keep track of the different iterations they had in their head, and if they ever want to go back to maybe like the first iteration, they can very easily. So I just thought that this was something that was pretty interesting. interesting. But yeah, definitely was just a very interesting aspect of their sketching process. Now, when it comes to the actual like final line art, his line art is pretty clean and thin, but he doesn't complete each line all the time. Oftentimes, especially in areas where there are a lot of overlapping lines, or there's like a lot of lines kind of meeting up in kind of like one spot in like a really tight spot, so that way it makes the area less busy and not as overwhelming. And for the lines that do actually like properly overlap and maybe like in sections that will be darker from shadows or something, they will thicken up the lines and kind of color in the corner sections where lines intersect. It basically just adds depth to the final piece. Alright, when it comes to rendering, this was actually pretty surprising. He first uses the sketch brush to very kind of like messily block out some base colors and shadows and highlights. Then he hides that layer and creates a new layer to add the base color with just a typical hard brush pen and the bucket tool. Each area of color is on its own layer. So the skin is one layer, hair is another, maybe any white color is on a separate layer, any black color and the clothes is like a separate layer, blah blah blah, and so on and so forth until all the base colors are down. Once that's done, they then take the messy rendering layer and duplicate it. So if you have like 5 base color layers, then you also have 5 copies of the messy render layer. Then you put each messy render layer above each base color layer and set them to be a clipping mask, so they only appear within like that base color. And then from here, he goes section by section rendering each one. So he'll focus on like rendering the skin, and then he'll move on to the hair and so on. This was pretty interesting to me since I've never seen a method like this before, and I kind of like it. He's able to get a very rough layout of how he wants the shadows and stuff to fall, and then refine it later. And since each section is on its own layer, it means it's easily confined. So you can really just focus on each section and not needing to worry about accidentally overbrushing into like the hair while doing the skin or something like that. And even though I find creating the base color layers very tedious, I will say that I do find the rendering experience afterwards to be pretty nice. During this process, since the rendering brush does automatically do a bit of blending and it's not at like full opacity all the time, he will also color pick some of the colors, the new colors that you get out of the blending that happens to kind of further blend all the colors together and make it look a bit more smooth. He will also use the lasso tool to create hard edges that go into soft edges. So you just use the lasso tool to select a section that you maybe want like the bottom part of it to be a very hard shadow, so there's no blending, but you want it to blend out into a softer shadow. So it blends out. It's not a total hard shading all around. After that, he moves on to do the finishing touches. This includes adding a terminator, which is the line you often see artists use between something like the base color and the shadow. So this can be done on a new layer, which is set to overlay and use a soft brush to create a line between the shadow and base color. So for instance, the skin or maybe like a gold color, they use more of an orange color to create this line. And then other areas like hair or clothes is done with colors like maybe a dark red, although I imagine that, you know, this color can vary a lot by the piece and based on the surrounding colors. But dark red was one that I saw getting used around as well. After that, he renders the eyes above the line art, which is nothing too fancy for the pupils, as well as adding these like eye bag things around the eyes. It goes around most of the eyes and is quite prominent and unique looking. From what I could tell, this seems to be done on most characters he draws, whether they technically have eye bags or not. And I'm not even really sure if it's supposed to be like eye bags. I just don't know how else to describe it, but hopefully visually you can see what I mean. But either way, I think it looks pretty cool and I consider it a main part of their art style. And of course, besides the eyes, they'll add some final touches above the line art as well. There's really no set rules. It's just whatever they think it needs some extra fixing or additions. Like oftentimes they'll add some strands of hair above everything else. And I almost forgot. He will take the skin color and with the airbrush, add it to the tips of the hair very lightly to kind of blend in the hair more. I think this helps give his piece a more soft look that they currently have among a lot of the other decisions he makes. In terms of the colors he uses, he sticks to more muted palettes, and unlike the other artists we've studied so far, he only adjusts the value and saturation to get things like shadows and highlights most of the time. So unlike most artists, unlike a lot of artists, which will often also do a hue shift at the same time, they don't necessarily do a hue shift. It's not that they never do a hue shift, but at least from what I can tell, they don't usually do a hue shift. Like it's not the default. They first will move the color down and to the right or like up and to the left to get the highlights and shadows. And then maybe like if they want to add a little bit of color here and there, they'll also do a bit of a hue shift. But unlike most artists, they do not do a hue shift. Okay, and now it's time for the master study. As usual, the first master study I do, I always basically copy over the line art of a piece so that way I can focus primarily on just the rendering. And then I do another copy where I try to redraw something completely in their style, but like not based off of a previous drawing. But anyways, I decided to go with this piece since he actually has a tutorial that he posted on his channel a couple of years ago. So it's a little bit outdated, but from what I could tell, he still follows most of the stuff they mentioned in the tutorial. And he used this piece as his example piece of how he renders things. So I thought this would be perfect practice since I also have a video to reference. And it was pretty interesting. I think this is when I really, like the first master study is always when I really start to figure out an artist and their style and kind of figure out these small details and everything and how to replicate a lot of the small details that they do. So I definitely recommend doing one of these whenever you study an artist. But I will say that at first I was definitely a little bit confused, because it's just like very backwards. I don't usually work this way, so it definitely was a struggle. He's also pretty detailed in the amount of details he adds into like his shading and like his overall rendering, and I'm not usually like that. I'm usually pretty basic when it comes to like shading and stuff, since I wouldn't consider myself very skilled in shading. So this was definitely pretty hard to mimic, and I think the hardest part was by far the hair. The hair was so difficult. I still do not think I did the hair justice. I think the hair was so hard to do. It just, there's something about the way they render his hair that like, it looks really nice, and I don't know how to replicate it yet. I still don't feel like I did a good job really getting the hair down, but you know, it is something that I will continue to work on, and I hope I can render my hair as pretty as he does one day. But besides that, I'd say overall it was a very interesting experience. I've never rendered anything in this style before, especially with the way the colors are picked and using a blending brush, since all the other artists I've studied so far don't blend. So this is probably like the first artist I've done so far that like does actually blend their colors. So one thing that I did note is how he adds some color to the hands. So like the fingers, he adds kind of just like some color, I think, to help bring life to the hands. He adds some color to the tip of the hands as well as the like joints, like the middle joint, as well as the knuckles a bit, I think. And I definitely really like that. I think I'm going to try to replicate that in my style in the future. But yeah, this was definitely very difficult, very interesting. I was too lazy to look up the pattern that he used, even though I'm pretty sure I could just find out a clip studio if I really wanted to. So I just redrew it by hand. So that looks a little wonky, that's why. But yeah, overall, it came out, okay. I don't really know what else to say about it. It came out fine. Definitely learned a lot. But yeah, this is definitely a pretty hard rendering style for me, since rendering is definitely my weak point right now. Okay, now that I've done the master copy, now this is the drawing that, you know, I just do off the top of my head, but completely in the style. So I decided to draw my OC Wisp, who is part of My Future webcomic, which I have a video about him. If you're interested in him, you can go watch it. But in terms of the actual drawing, I will say that it was a little hard. I do think I made the eyes a little bit big at first. At like the very end of the rendering, I do go back and like fix them to make it a little bit smaller. But that being said, there are things like, for instance, the width of the neck. I usually go with pretty thin necks. So whenever I have to do a neck that's wider than my regular neck, it definitely feels pretty weird because it just feels like off to me. Another difficult part is definitely the face. I feel like we both use pretty similar proportions for our face, but they're like just enough of a difference that there is a difference in how you draw it, but the difference is like really small, so it's kind of hard for me to like get that nuanced difference between the two, if that makes any sense. So that was definitely a bit of a challenge. The hair is also a challenge. She obviously like really understands hair, and hair is something that I really want to study soon since I'm struggling so much with it, and it definitely came through here because I feel like the way they do their hair is just like a really big part of their style, and it looks so pretty, and it was so hard for me to do the hair. And I think part of that is that I just don't fully understand how like this character's hair fully attaches to his head right now, and you know, it's like if I don't know how that happens, like the logistics between how that's happening, I feel like it's really hard to render the hair in the really detailed style that he renders his hair. So yeah, I think that definitely dropped the ball on that. That was definitely pretty much the hardest. I do think I made his pupils a bit of a weird shape. I think they probably should have been more rounded. I will say that I do think the rendering didn't come out too bad. For some reason, the little like black shirt part that he wears, I really like the way that came out in the rendering. Don't really fully understand like what exactly. I just think it came out pretty nice. And yeah, I think like for like the skin and like that black part, I think like the rendering was like fine. It's more like the hair. The hair was definitely the biggest struggle here. Okay, now that the copies are done, I wanted to try to implement what I learned into my own style and see what I could take away. So last time I did the same exact pose for both drawings. I actually thought I would do that again since I thought it was pretty cool to see both styles side by side like that. That being said, in my drawing, like I said, I use a much thinner neck, and actually they're usually a little bit longer, but I feel like I made his neck shorter than I normally would here. I also shrunk his face a little bit in, since I feel like my faces are a little bit thinner, or maybe I just screwed up the original face, I'm not sure. But on top of that, I definitely redid the pupils, and I think the pupils honestly came out a lot better. I made his eyes slightly bigger like I did before. In my art style, I like to add an outline to the characters, as well as like you outline any important parts, including like the face and stuff. But here I also redid the hand. For those of you that have watched my Tricky Wagon study videos, you'll probably recognize the hand. I think it came out amazing. I love the way these new hands look, so they look so good in my new pieces. From there, I also tried to do the rendering with the soul brush that Blue Biscuits uses, and the soul brush does not have blending. So this was a very interesting experience because I feel like his brush works a lot through blending, and this one wasn't blending. It was really just using kind of opacity to blend. So it was definitely a pretty interesting experience, pretty hard. I think it came out pretty good though overall. Like honestly, I think it came out much better than the copy. So I'm pretty glad with that. Okay, and that's it. What did you guys think? I hope that you found this video useful. I have a bunch of other art style videos I've posted before for Tricky Wagon, Blue Biscuits, and TBHK are already up if you want to go watch it. I also usually post these once a week on Fridays, but I think since Inktober is starting, I might do these bi-weekly just because they take a lot of time, and Inktober also takes a lot of time. So we'll definitely have to see. Y'all just have to subscribe and see, but these might slow down for the next month or two. But besides that, I do also like designing my own original characters, and I have a bunch of characters I want to talk about in the future. But in the meantime, I think I also want to be doing a lot more fan art videos as well, like just drawing fan art of games and characters and stuff that I like, and then we can like yap about it together. So if any of that sounds fun, please feel free to subscribe. Also, we hit 1,000 subscribers today, which is pretty crazy. Thank you so much. This is a great goal or whatever. I will do something special for it. I don't know what yet, but I'll do something special for it. The next art style study video will be of Tamika. So if that sounds interesting, she won the vote. The next vote is already live, so you can go to my community post tabs and vote on it. And yeah, that's it. If anything that I just said sounds interesting, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button if this was useful, make sure to leave a comment. I think there's something called hype points now, so I don't know, if you have a hype point to use, maybe use it on me. I would appreciate it, I think. I'm not quite sure what it does, but I think it's supposed to be helpful. But yeah. Okay, bye-bye.